大家好，讀你聽2.0。今日繼續讀 A.Christie 嘅 Sparkling Cyanide， 去到 Book 2嘅第2節啦嚇。上一節咧就講到咧呢個 Lucilla Drake 同 Iris 嘅對話啦，介紹咗 Lucilla Drake 嘅呢個人物啦，佢對於Ruth Blessing 啊，佢對於 George Barton 嘅睇法啦，一個好似比較輕鬆嘅章節啦嚇。即係又有啲少笑位啦，又好似同嗰個嫌疑犯又拉唔上關係，但係又好似有少聯繫咁樣一個我哋叫做 filler chapter 啦咁嘅感覺啦。好啦，咁呢一節就睇下佢會唔會講翻啲嫌疑人啦嚇，同埋呢個 George Barton 呢個約會嚇，呢個計劃嚇進行成點啦 ？OK。How I wish they had never come here. Sandra Farraday uttered the words with such unusual bitterness that her husband turned to look at her in surprise. It was as though his own thoughts had been put into words, the thoughts that he had been trying so hard to conceal. So Sandra, too, felt as he did. She, too, had felt that Fairhaven was spoiled, its peace impaired, by these new neighbors a mile away across the park.He said, voicing his surprise impulsively, I didn't know you felt like that about them too. Immediately, or so it seemed to him, she withdrew into herself. Neighbors are so important in the country. One has either to be rude or friendly. One can't, as in London, just keep people as amiable acquaintances. No, said Stephen, one can't do that. And now we're committed to this extraordinary party. They were both silent.Running over in their minds the scene at lunch. George Barton had been friendly, even exuberant in manner, with a kind of undercurrent of excitement of which they had both been conscious. George Barton was really very odd these days. Stephen had never noticed him much in the time preceding Rosemary's death. George had just been there in the background, the kindly dull husband of a young and beautiful wife.Stephen had never even felt a pang of disquiet over the betrayal of George. George had been the kind of husband who was born to be betrayed. So much older, so devoid of the attractions necessary to hold an attractive and capricious woman. Had George himself been deceived? Stephen did not think so. George, he thought, knew Rosemary very well. He loved her, and he was the kind of man who was humble about his own powers of holding a wife's interests. All the same,George must have suffered. Stephen began to wonder just what George had felt when Rosemary died. He and Sandra had seen little of him in the months following the tragedy. It was not until he had suddenly appeared as a near neighbor at Little Priors that he had re-entered their lives, and at once, so Stephen thought, he had seemed different, more alive, more positive, and yes, decidedly odd. He had been odd today.That suddenly blurted out invitation, a party for Iris's 18th birthday. He did so hope Stephen and Sandra would both come. Stephen and Sandra had been so kind to them down here. Sandra had said quickly, of course, it would be delightful. Naturally, Stephen would be rather tired when they got back to London, and she herself had a great many tiresome engagements, but she did hope they would be able to manage it. Then let's settle a day now, shall we?George's face, florid, smiling, insistent. I thought perhaps one day the week after next, Wednesday or Thursday. Thursday is November 2nd. Would that be all right? But we'll arrange any day that suits you both. It had been the kind of invitation that pinned you down. There was a certain lack of social savoir-faire. Stephen noticed that Iris' mouth had gone red and looked embarrassed. Sandra had been perfect. She had smilingly surrendered to the inevitable and said that Thursday, November the 2nd, would suit them very well. Suddenly voicing his thoughts, Stephen said sharply, We needn't go. Sandra turned her face slightly towards him. It wore a thoughtful, considering air. You think not? It's easy to make some excuse. He'll only insist on us coming some other time, or change the day. He seems very set on our coming. I can't think why. It's Iris's party.And I can't believe she is so particularly anxious for our company. No, Sandra sounded thoughtful. Then she said, You know where this party is to be? No, the Luxembourg. The shock nearly deprived him of speech. He felt the color ebbing out of his cheeks. He pulled himself together and met her eyes. Was it his fancy, or was there meaning in the level gaze? But it's preposterous, he exclaimed, blustering a little in his attempt to conceal his own personal emotion. The Luxembourg, where to revive all that, the man must be mad. I thought of that, said Sandra, but then we shall certainly refuse to go. The whole thing was terribly unpleasant. You remember all the publicity, the pictures in the papers? I remember the unpleasantness, said Sandra. Doesn't he realize how disagreeable it would be for us? He has a reason, you know, Stephen, a reason that he gave me. What was it? He felt thankful that she was looking away from him when she spoke. He took me aside after lunch. He said he wanted to explain. He told me that the girl, Iris, had never recovered properly from the shock of her sister's death. She paused, and Stephen said unwillingly, Well, I dare say that may be true enough. She looks far from well. I thought at lunch how ill she was looking. Yes, I noticed it too, although she has seemed in good health and spirits on the whole lately. But I'm telling you what George Barton said. He told me that Iris has consistently avoided Luxembourg ever since as far as she was able. I don't wonder. But according to him, that is all wrong. It seems he consulted a nerve specialist on the subject, one of these modern men, and his advice is that after a shock of any kind, the trouble must be faced, not avoided. The principle, I gather, is like that of standing up an M and again immediately after a crash. Does the specialist suggest another suicide? Sandra replied quietly. He suggests that the association of the restaurant must be overcome. It is, after all, just a restaurant. He proposed an ordinary, pleasant party with, as far as possible, the same people present. Delightful for the people. Do you mind so much, Stephen? A swift pang of alarm shot through him. He said quickly, Of course I don't mind. I just thought it rather a gruesome idea. Personally, I shouldn't mind in the least. I was really thinking of you, if you don't mind. She interrupted him. I do mind, very much. But the way George Barton put it made it very difficult to refuse. After all, I have frequently been to the Luxembourg since, so have you. One is constantly being asked there. But not under these circumstances. No, Stephen said. As you say, it is difficult to refuse, and if we put it off, the invitation will be renewed. But there's no reason, Sandra, why you should have to endure it. I'll go, and you can cry off at the last minute. A headache, chill, something of that kind. He saw her chin go up. That would be cowardly. No, Stephen, if you go, I go. After all, she laid her hand on his arm. However little our marriage means, it should at least mean sharing our difficulties. But he was staring at her, rendered dumb by one poignant phrase which had escaped her so easily, as though it voiced a long familiar and not very important fact. Recovering himself, he said, Why do you say that? However little our marriage means. She looked at him steadily, her eyes wide and honest. Isn't it true? No, 1,000 times no. Our marriage means everything to me. She smiled. I suppose it does, in a way. We're a good team, Stephen. We pull together with a satisfactory result. I didn't mean that. He found his breath was coming unevenly. He took her hand in both of his, holding it very closely. Sandra, don't you know that you mean all the world to me? And suddenly she did know it. It was incredible, unforeseen, but it was so. She was in his arms, and he was holding her close, kissing her, stammering out incoherent words. Sandra, Sandra, darling, I love you. I've been so afraid I'd lose you. She heard herself saying, Because of Rosemary? Yes. He let go of her, stepped back. His face was ludicrous in his dismay. You knew about Rosemary? Of course, all the time. And you understand? She shook her head. No, I don't understand. I don't think I ever should. You loved her? No, really, it was you I loved. A surge of bitterness swept over her. She quoted, From the first moment you saw me across the room? Don't repeat that lie, for it was a lie. He was not taken aback by that sudden attack. He seemed to consider her words thoughtfully. Yes, it was a lie, and yet, in a queer way, it wasn't. I'm beginning to believe that it was true. Oh, try and understand, Sandra. You know the people who always have a noble and good reason to mask their meaner actions? The people who have to be honest when they want to be unkind, who thought it their duty to repeat so and so, who are such hypocrites to themselves that they go through to their lives and convinced that every mean and beastly actions was done in a spirit of unselfishness. Try and realize that the opposite of those people can exist too. people who are so cynical, so distrustful of themselves and of life that they only believe in their bad motives. You were the woman I needed. That at least is true. And I do honestly believe now, looking back on it, that if it hadn't been true, I should never have gone through with it. She said bitterly, you were not in love with me. No, I'd never been in love. I was a starved, sexless creature who prided himself, yes I did, on the fastidious coldness of his nature. And then I did fall in love across the room. A silly, violent puppy love. A thing like a midsummer thunderstorm, brief, unreal, quickly over, he added bitterly. Indeed, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. He paused and then went on. It was here at Fairhaven that I woke up and realized the truth. The truth? The only thing in life that mattered to me was you, and keeping your love. If I had only known. What do you think? I thought you were planning to go away with her. With Rosemary? He gave a short laugh. That would indeed have been penal servitude for life. Didn't she want you to go away with her? Yes, she did. What happened? Stephen drew a deep breath. They were back again, facing once more that intangible menace. He said, the Luxembourg happened. They were both silent, seeing they both knew the same thing. The blue cyanosed face of a once lovely woman, staring at the dead woman and then looking up to meet each other's eyes. Stephen said, forget it, Sandra. For God's sake, let us forget it. It's no use forgetting. We're not going to be allowed to forget. There was a pause. Then Sandra said, what are we going to do? What you said just now, facing things together. Go to this horrible party, whatever the reason for it may be. You don't believe what George Barton said about Iris. No, do you? It could be true, but even if it is, it's not the real reason. What do you think the real reason is? I don't know, Stephen, but I'm afraid. Of George Barton? Yes, I think he knows. Stephen said sharply, knows what? She turned her head slowly until her eyes met his. She said in a whisper, we mustn't be afraid. We must have courage. All the courage in the world. You're going to be a great man, Stephen. A man the world needs. And nothing shall interfere with that. I'm your wife, and I love you. What do you think this party is, Sandra? I think it's a trap, he said slowly. And we walk into it? We can't afford to show we know it's a trap. No, it's true. Suddenly, Sandra threw back her head and laughed. She said, do your worst, Rosemary. You won't win. He gripped her shoulder. Be quiet, Sandra. Rosemary's dead. Is she? Sometimes she feels very much alive. 哇，有一種強烈嘅攻心計嘅感覺喎，即係呢一個邀請George Barton 嘅呢個邀請咧，就完全係受到呢個 Farraday 夫婦嘅解讀接納應約。好似彷彿係一種接受咗一個挑戰咁樣啦，佢哋係決定去參加呢個遊戲，有一種咁嘅意味。咁即係話咧係會有一種鬥志啦，有一種智力嘅對抗啦你就 set 個陷阱俾我，而我咧就知道係陷阱，但係我都要嚟因為我唔怕你，我唔會示弱咁樣，即係有一種唔單止係一種接受挑戰，仲有一種底氣添咁就令到成件事就豐富好多，刺激有趣好多呢個寫得非常之好。咁亦都有交代一啲感情上嘅糾葛嘅解決啦，即係呢兩夫婦終於都講晒出嚟啦，哪怕係即係有一種好似都係一種交代啦，但係即係佢都有感情喺入面嘅。一個都幾 juicy 嘅一個段落亦都交代咗 George Barton 係話為咗慶祝 Iris 生日嘅呢個包裝啦，之前冇講嘅而家就交代埋啦。OK， 好，呢個章節睇下有啲咩字同大家分享下先。Exuberant 呢個字常用成日都見嘅 Exuberant。一開始咧就係話 George 咧就好 exuberant 咁樣邀請佢哋啦，或者好 exuberant 咁樣嘅態度去對呢個 Farraday 嘅 couple 啦。佢意思就係 full of energy, excitement, cheerfulness 即係興高采烈精力充沛咁樣意思咧。savoir faire 法文啦，一聽就知啦。咁喺 A.Christie 嘅筆下咧，都耐唔耐會出現嘅，亦都我知道喺嗰個年代係都常用嘅。今時今日就少啲但係都 都係仲係常見嘅 savoir faire 就係社交能力啦，中文解釋the ability to act or speak appropriately in social situations 即係一個比較好嘅社交能力就最後啦 Poignant 啦都係常用字嚟嘅 Poignant咁就係中文就呢個中文翻譯我覺得幾傳神嘅，叫酸楚evoking a keen sense of sadness or regret 酸楚 Poignant 即係有一種佢係一種悲傷，但係佢係會即係會 keen sense 即係可能會刺到你嘅一種酸楚 Poignant 即係一種比較拿住嘅 OK 好，今日就講到呢度啦，下一次第3節再同大家見面，拜拜。